Hi YouTube and welcome to my channel. My name is Patrick. Today we're diving into the world of Linux from a beginner's perspective. If you're new to Linux, you might find these insights helpful, and if you're a seasoned Arch user, you may find it amusing, but hopefully enlightening. So that being said, let's dig right in. When I first started with Linux, I've gotta admit, it was like stepping into an alien world. Everything seemed complex compared to what I was used to, like navigating unfamiliar terrain. Here's the thing though, Linux is actually quite simple. It's just different. But as far as actually using and managing Linux, there's a pervasive logic across the system. Once you wrap your head around how things work, you'll find that it's a lot easier than you think. I remember being overwhelmed, and I switched back to Windows and then back and forth multiple times, but eventually, with each challenge, I found a forum, I found a tutorial, and a community that was ready to help. Let's talk about installation and setup. With so many Linux distributions out there, it can feel overwhelming. Do you go with Ubuntu, or do you go with Mint? Do you go with Arch? Do you go with Garuda? Each distribution has its own features and benefits. The choices are endless, but the fact is you're going to have to install it yourself. And that's a roadblock. Most people will never install Windows. It comes with the computer. But installing Linux is difficult for the uninitiated. It involves steps that visually and logically fall outside common knowledge and expectations. The problem is, installing Linux is already as simple as it could possibly be, but getting to the graphical installer, that's the issue. Most people will quit either trying to make a bootable thumb drive, or they'll give up when they have to enter their computer's BIOS. It's just simply not user-friendly, and there's nothing that can be done about it. Alright guys, and once you get into Linux, here's your new best friend, Bash, or the Commands Line Interface, or CLI. It seems daunting at first, with its text-based commands and operations, but it's actually your gateway to unlocking your computer's potential. See, the commands line is actually quite simple. The problem is that it's not easy to learn in the first place. But when I say it's simple, I mean you type in a command and then it gives you a response. Simple. But again, the problem is, how do you figure out those commands at first? I mean, there's no visual cue to give you information about what you can do. It's all hidden behind a blinking cursor and a black box. Frankly, the appearance of the terminal scares people away. And I'm gonna sound really stupid for a second, but hang on with me. I think this is one circumstance where AI would be helpful. Hear me out. So what if instead of typing arcane commands, you could use natural language to instruct your computer, and then it figures out the commands for you? People are already familiar with similar experiences like using Google, but it would turn a very unfriendly experience into an easy one. And obviously there'd be a way to switch out of this mode and just run commands yourself. But for someone who's just getting started in Linux, this could be a lifesaver. Alright, and then you have to worry about managing software. So managing software is beyond a point-and-click operation. Say hello to package managers like apt, yum, and pacman. These are powerful tools that streamline the process of installing, updating, and removing software packages. See, installing software on Linux is different than in other systems. Notice I said different, not more difficult. See, in Linux distributions, there's generally a central software management system, and that system varies depending on what distro you choose. apt is the one that comes with Linux Mint. apt allows you to manage, install, and remove software all in one centralized place. This is different than Windows, where you scour the internet for executables and pray that you didn't click the wrong link. See, Linux's approach is safer, as the default repos that apt calls upon contain software that's vetted by the distro's developers. So, yes, this is different, and different has a learning curve. Different is scary, but at the same time, it's simpler. It's just not what you're used to. All right, so let's talk about the overall experience. People have to make a bootable thumb drive, which will scare people off. People have to go into their computer's boot menu or BIOS, which will scare people off. People have to do the whole setup, which, although it's very streamlined and pretty, will scare people off. And then people are faced with a terminal, which they inevitably run into when they try to solve a problem and they look up how to fix it, and it's all terminal commands, and that's going to scare people off. I think it's safe to say we know why Linux's market share is at 4%. Simply put, this is way too much for the average user to wrap their head around, and it's all at once. It's a very steep learning curve. That's not even mentioning that there's an entirely different ecosystem of software available. So at the end of the day, we need to figure out some very difficult questions to determine how we can get Linux in the hands of more people. All right, so for those of you who are considering using Linux, I'd recommend setting aside a good weekend and watching some tutorials ahead of time. But I can promise you it is simpler than Windows, it is safer than Windows, it's more private than Windows. I could go on. Like, the benefits are really endless. There are some negatives. The software that you use is going to be different. You're not going to have the Adobe suite. You're not going to have Microsoft Office. There are good alternatives. Again, they're different. And that's the whole reoccurring theme here. This stuff is different from what you're used to. And at the same time, it's different, but it's generally more simple. The problem is you're getting hit with all of this stuff at once, right? There's no ramp up to being proficient. It's all immediately you have to figure out one thing after another. And for me, when I first switched to Linux in 2012, I went right back to Windows multiple times. And I went back and forth like that for months because at the end of the day, people need their computer to get work done. Their computer exists to serve a function, which is to launch applications and do work, play games, write stupid YouTube scripts, all of that kind of stuff. And really, it's too much for new people. You have to really want it to go through all of that pain. But I think that more people than ever really do want it. But it's just we have to figure out some better ways to introduce people. That's the real challenge here. How do we overcome the roadblock of making bootable USBs? How do we overcome the roadblock of entering your computer's BIOS? These are hard questions, but they're important because these are the real things preventing Linux from becoming more mainstream. Funny enough, I think that we already solved this problem once and then got rid of it. Got rid of the solution. So back when I first installed Ubuntu in 2012, there was a way that you could launch an installer inside of Windows, and it would set up Ubuntu as a dual boot on your Windows system. You didn't have to go into the BIOS. You didn't have to make a thumb drive. You downloaded Ubuntu Linux. You ran the executable just like any other piece of software. It split your hard drive in half. On one half, it gave you Ubuntu. On the other half, it gave you Windows. We need something like that today. Because if we can take away the pain of making the bootable thumb drive, entering your computer's BIOS, going through the installation steps, all of which are daunting, if we can get rid of those things and just make it so that you click an executable in Windows and bam, you have Linux, I think the time is now. I think people are ready for this. because with Windows 10 end of support coming up, with Windows 11 being an advertising vessel and privacy nightmare, I think people are ready. And unfortunately, I'm not a developer. I'm not. I'm a security engineer. I don't know how to write the executable that would install Linux theoretically. But I know it's possible because we did it before. Let's bring that back. That's my open petition to you Ubuntu developers out there, you Mint developers. If you can make something like that work today, which I realize secure boot and the Windows security stuff, that's going to get in the way. But I still think it's possible, hopefully. If not, it's still an idea worth exploring. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Linux from the beginner's perspective. I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed making it for you. And as always, my name was Patrick, and I'll catch you in the next one.